I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. I never saw it coming. That's the thing about betrayal, you never imagine it could happen to you until it does. For 14 years, Jenna and I had built a life that looked perfect on the surface. A beautiful home, 2 kids we adored, and a bond that seemed unbreakable. But looking back, maybe the cracks had been there all along, and I was just too blind, or too trusting, to notice. It started subtly, the kind of thing you shrug off because it's easier than facing the truth. Jenna's sharp remarks became more frequent, her warmth replaced by something colder, more calculated. "You're always working," she'd say, her tone clipped, as though my late nights building our business were a personal affront. I thought it was stress, or maybe the exhaustion that comes with parenting 2 teenagers. I wanted to believe we could fix it. I suggested counseling, she shrugged it off. I planned weekend getaways, she said she was too busy. So, I let it slide, hoping time would mend whatever was broken. I didn't realize I was already living on borrowed time. The turning point came on a random Tuesday night. Jenna had been unusually quiet during dinner, her focus fixed on her phone. She claimed she was helping a friend with a personal crisis. I didn't press, even though I could feel the distance between us growing. Later, when she retreated to the bedroom without a word, I decided to give her space. I left the house, intending to grab a coffee and clear my head. The diner wasn't far, just a short drive down Main Street. I slid into a booth in the corner, ordered a coffee, and stared out the window, letting my thoughts swirl. That's when I heard his voice. "Yeah, we've been meeting up for months now," the man said, his tone low but casual, like he was discussing the weather. She's got him completely fooled. I froze. There was something familiar about the voice, but I couldn't place it. Curious, I leaned back slightly, my ears straining to catch the conversation. "I don't know how she keeps it up," the voice continued. "But man, she's worth the trouble. Jenna's something else." My blood turned to ice. "Jenna? My Jenna?" I turned my head slightly, enough to catch a glimpse of the speaker. It was George, my best friend since high school. The man who had stood beside me at my wedding, who had been a constant presence in my life for years. He was sitting there, casually discussing an affair with my wife. I wanted to confront him right then and there. My fists clenched under the table, and every fiber of my being screamed for action. But something held me back. Rage mixed with disbelief, and I realized I needed more than words overheard in a diner. I needed proof. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced through every interaction, every moment that suddenly felt like a lie. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had a plan forming. I wouldn't confront Jenna, not yet. First, I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal. The next morning, while Jenna was in the shower, I grabbed her phone. It was locked, but I knew her passcode, our daughter's birthdate. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages, searching for anything that could confirm what I'd heard. To my frustration, her messages with George were sparse, almost innocuous. But something about them felt off, like they were written with an unspoken understanding. Then I found the folder. Hidden among her apps was a file labeled Work Stuff. Inside were screenshots of messages, receipts for hotel bookings, and photos of her and George together. The evidence was damning. I put the phone back where I found it, my heart pounding. There was no denying it now. Jenna was cheating on me, and she wasn't even trying very hard to hide it. The thought stung more than I cared to admit. Over the next few days, I gathered more evidence. I installed tracking software on her phone, giving me access to her location and messages in real time. It didn't take long to confirm what I already knew. Jenna's yoga retreats were excuses to spend weekends with George at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. But it wasn't just her actions that hurt. It was George's involvement, his casual willingness to destroy the life we'd built. He wasn't just a friend, he was family, or so I'd thought. I kept my composure, though it wasn't easy. Every time Jenna kissed me goodbye or smiled across the dinner table, I wanted to scream. But I forced myself to wait. I needed to play this carefully, to ensure that when the time came, I could take them both down without leaving any room for doubt. Revenge wasn't just a thought, it was a plan. And I intended to see it through. Keeping up the charade of a happy husband was harder than I thought. Every smile Jenna gave me felt like an insult, every kiss a mockery of the life I thought we shared. But I buried the anger, channeling it into focus. If I lashed out now, I'd lose the upper hand. And I couldn't afford that. The evidence piled up quickly. Jenna wasn't careful, or maybe she didn't care enough to be. Her phone, now synced to the tracking app I'd installed, was a treasure trove of damning information. Her texts with George weren't outright explicit, but the subtext was unmistakable: meeting at the usual spot. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. It was the photos that sealed it for me. They weren't obscene, just intimate, Jenna and George laughing together, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand brushing her hair aside. One image showed them sharing a quiet dinner in a dimly lit restaurant, her eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was like watching a stranger. Even as I documented their betrayal, I couldn't stop the memories from flooding back. Jenna and I had met in college, both of us brimming with dreams and potential. She'd been the fiery, ambitious one, her laugh infectious and her passion for life magnetic. I was quieter, the steady anchor to her vibrant energy. I thought we balanced each other perfectly. We built a life together, brick by brick, compromise by compromise. When the kids came along, I shifted gears, taking on more hours at work so she could pursue her passions without the burden of finances weighing her down. It hadn't always been easy, but I thought it was worth it. Now I wondered if she'd ever felt the same. I couldn't let myself dwell on the past. The present was demanding enough. Over the next 2 weeks, I crafted my plan with meticulous care. Every decision was calculated, every step deliberate. I wasn't going to confront Jenna until I had everything in place to ensure she couldn't wriggle out of this. First, I secured our finances. Our joint savings account was the only one she had access to, and I wasn't about to let her use it to bankroll her affair. Early one morning, while Jenna was still asleep, I transferred the bulk of the money into a new account in my name. I left just enough to avoid raising suspicion. Then, I contacted our bank and had the account flagged for unauthorized transactions. If she tried to withdraw a large sum, I'd know immediately. Next, I reached out to a divorce attorney. He came highly recommended and, more importantly, specialized in cases involving infidelity. I handed over the evidence I'd gathered, photos, texts, locations, everything. He reviewed it with the cool detachment of someone who'd seen it all before. "You've got a solid case," he said, flipping through the pages of printed messages. "The prenup will protect most of your assets, but this evidence could sway the judge even further in your favor, especially with custody. Judges don't take kindly to cheating spouses when there are kids involved." Custody. The word made my stomach turn. I didn't want to rip my kids away from their mother, but I couldn't ignore the fact that Jenna had prioritized her affair over her family. How could I trust her judgment after this? Still, I resolved not to let my anger cloud what was best for Emma and Daniel. They deserved stability, even if Jenna and I couldn't provide it together. The final piece of the puzzle was George. I couldn't let him walk away unscathed. As a mechanic, he relied heavily on my business to stay afloat. Over the years, I directed countless clients his way, trusting him with everything from routine tune-ups to major repairs. That trust was now a bitter pill to swallow. Quietly, I began redirecting my business elsewhere. It wasn't hard, there were plenty of capable mechanics in town. When a client asked for a recommendation, I steered them toward a new shop, citing vague issues with George's reliability. It didn't take long for the ripple effect to start. His garage, once bustling with activity, began to slow. But that wasn't enough. I needed to expose him for the fraud he was. One evening, after Jenna had left for one of her book club meetings, I pulled out the evidence I'd collected and started drafting an anonymous email. It went to George's largest clients and detailed his affair with Jenna, including photos as proof. I stopped short of sharing anything too graphic. This wasn't about destroying his life, just ensuring he faced the consequences of his actions. With everything in place, I waited. Patience had never been my strong suit, but the anticipation kept me going. Every day felt like a countdown to the inevitable explosion. Jenna continued her charade, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. She laughed, she kissed me, she played the role of devoted wife, and all I could think was, how much longer can you keep this up? Then, one morning, the first domino fell. It started with a phone call from George. I didn't answer, letting it go to voicemail instead. His voice was frantic, a far cry from the cocky tone I'd heard at the diner weeks ago. "Hey, man, we need to talk. I think there's been a misunderstanding or something. Call me back, okay?" I didn't. Instead, I replayed the message, savoring the panic in his voice. Jenna, too, seemed more tense than usual. Her phone buzzed constantly, and she spent more time than usual locked in the bathroom. Whatever was happening, it was clear that my plan was working. That night, as Jenna sat across from me at dinner, I could feel the weight of her secrets pressing down on us. She avoided my gaze, picking at her food, her usual chatter replaced by an uneasy silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of satisfaction. The storm had begun, and I was ready for whatever came next. The silence at dinner that night was heavy, punctuated only by the occasional clink of a fork against a plate. Jenna, usually chatty, was unusually quiet. She picked at her salad, her eyes darting to her phone whenever it vibrated. My kids, oblivious to the tension between us, chatted about their day. I joined in, smiling at their stories, but my focus was razor-sharp on Jenna. After dinner, she retreated to the bedroom under the pretense of being tired. I lingered in the kitchen, cleaning up as my mind churned. The time to confront her was drawing near, but I wasn't sure if tonight was the night. I wanted her to squirm a little longer, to feel the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. I gave her space, heading to the garage to busy myself with minor tasks. The garage had become my sanctuary, a place to think and plan without interruption. Tonight, however, I was restless. The time for action was now. I headed back inside, resolved. Jenna was sitting on the bed, her phone in her hand. She looked up, startled, as I entered the room. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. She tensed, her fingers tightening around the phone. "About what?" I gestured toward the bed. "Put the phone down." Her hesitation was brief but telling. Reluctantly, she set the phone on the nightstand. "What's this about?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I know about you and George." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I pressed on, my voice gaining strength. "I know about the weekends, the texts, the hotels. I know everything, Jenna." Silence hung in the air between us. Her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "I can explain." "Explain?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "Explain how you betrayed me. How you lied to me and our kids. Go ahead, Jenna, explain." The tears spilled over, but they didn't move me. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she stammered. "It was a mistake." A mistake?" I snapped. "A mistake is spilling coffee on a shirt. You don't accidentally sneak off to a motel with my best friend." Her shoulders shook as she sobbed, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. How long? I demanded. How long has this been going on? She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. A few months, she admitted. It didn't mean anything. I swear. Didn't mean anything. My voice rose, the anger I'd kept bottled up for weeks finally boiling over. You destroyed everything for something that didn't mean anything. I was lonely, she said weakly. You were always working, always busy. I felt unseen. I stared at her, incredulous. So your solution was to screw around with George? The man who stood at my side on our wedding day? The man I trusted more than anyone else? She didn't respond, her sobs filling the room. I paced back and forth, trying to rein in my fury. When I spoke again, my voice was cold. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The divorce papers are being drawn up. You'll be hearing from them soon. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with panic. No, please, Mark. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. We can fix this. Fix this? I said, incredulous. You think this is fixable? You and George made sure there was no coming back from this. She got off the bed, reaching for me. Please, Mark. For the kids. We can go to counseling, work through this. I'll do anything. I stepped back, out of her reach. You should have thought about the kids before you decided to cheat. You don't get to beg for forgiveness now. Her sobs grew louder, and she fell to her knees. Please, she whispered. I'll leave George. I'll do whatever it takes. It was almost pathetic, watching her grovel. But I wasn't about to let her manipulate me. Not anymore. This isn't just about you and me, I said. It's about respect, trust, and loyalty, none of which you've shown me. We're done, Jenna. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. What about the kids? She choked out. You can't take them away from me. I spun around, my expression hard. I have evidence of your affair, Jenna. Judges don't look kindly on mothers who prioritize their affairs over their children. I'll do everything in my power to ensure they stay with me. Her sobs turned into wails as I walked out of the room, leaving her to face the reality of her actions. My heart ached, not for her, but for what we'd lost, for the life we could have had if she hadn't destroyed it. As I shut the door behind me, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, relief, and an aching sadness. The confrontation was over, but the war wasn't. There was still George to deal with. And I was just getting started. The fallout from that night was swift and brutal. Jenna moved into the guest room, her once vibrant presence now a shadow in our home. The kids noticed, of course. Emma asked why Mom and Dad weren't sitting together at breakfast. Daniel wondered why Mom was crying in her room late at night. I told them only what I thought they needed to know. Mom and Dad are going through a tough time, but we both love you very much. It felt hollow, but it was all I could manage. Jenna tried to talk to me several times in the days that followed, each attempt met with silence. I wasn't interested in her excuses or her apologies. My focus was on the divorce proceedings and securing custody of the kids. My lawyer assured me that the evidence of her affair would work heavily in my favor. Then there was George. His business had all but crumbled since I'd cut ties. The email I'd sent to his biggest clients had done its job. One by one, they dropped him, unwilling to associate with a man who had no respect for personal or professional boundaries. I heard through mutual acquaintances that George was barely keeping the lights on. Good, I thought. He deserved every bit of it. I had just started to feel the first flicker of closure when a knock on my door one evening changed everything. It was George. I opened the door, stunned to see him standing there. He looked like hell, unkempt, eyes bloodshot, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something far more subdued. What do you want? I asked, my voice cold. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as though checking for witnesses. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you." I should have slammed the door in his face, but something in his expression stopped me. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him in. "Make it quick," I said, crossing my arms. George paced the living room, wringing his hands. "I screwed up, man. I know I did. And I know you have no reason to believe me, but, I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix anything," I shot back. "You destroyed my marriage and stabbed me in the back. What do you want, George? Forgiveness?" He shook his head. "No. I don't expect that. But there's something you need to know. Something Jenna hasn't told you." I narrowed my eyes, a sinking feeling settling in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" George hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to me, his hand shaking. "Just, read it." I opened the envelope, my heart pounding. Inside was a single piece of paper, a DNA test. My eyes scanned the page, landing on the words that hit me like a freight train: probability of paternity, 0%. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice rising. "It's Daniel," George said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's not your son." The room spun around me. I gripped the back of the couch for support, my mind racing. This can't be true," I stammered. "You're lying." "I wish I was," George said, his voice thick with regret. "But it's true. Jenna and I, it started before you two even got married. She told me she loved me, but when she found out she was pregnant, she said you were the safer choice. I didn't fight her on it. I was young and stupid. But now, I can't keep lying." I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. Memories of Daniel flashed through my mind, his first steps, his first words, the way he looked up to me with those big, trusting eyes. My son. My son. How could this be true? "Get out," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house." "Mark, please," George pleaded. "I just thought you should know." "Out!" I roared, throwing the envelope at him. He scrambled for the door, muttering apologies as he fled. I slammed the door shut behind him, my chest heaving with ragged breaths. I sank onto the couch, clutching my head in my hands. The DNA test stared up at me from where it had fallen, a cruel confirmation of everything I'd never wanted to believe. Daniel wasn't mine. Jenna had lied to me, not just about the affair, but about our very foundation. I wanted to scream, to break something, to undo the last 14 years of my life. But then a soft voice interrupted my spiraling thoughts. "Dad?" I looked up to see Daniel standing in the hallway, his small frame silhouetted by the dim light. He was clutching his favorite stuffed animal, his face etched with concern. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice trembling. I opened my arms, and he ran to me without hesitation. As I held him close, the storm inside me began to settle. It didn't matter what a piece of paper said. Daniel was my son. He always would be. In that moment, I realized that Jenna's lies didn't define me, and they didn't define my relationship with Daniel or Emma. My love for them was real, and nothing, no betrayal, no revelation, could take that away. The war wasn't over, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for my family. The real one. The one I chose, and who chose me right back.